is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
In the early 1960s, two young girls were brutally sexually assaulted and murdered in Hooksett, New Hampshire. The first killing took place in February 1960, when 18-year-old Sandra Valade disappeared during a snowstorm and was later found beaten, raped, and shot to death. The news of Sandra's disappearance shook the community, but there were no leads, and the case went cold. 4 years later, during another snowstorm, 14-year-old Pamela Mason was abducted, raped, and killed. Authorities quickly linked the two murders together, and within weeks of Pamela's body being found, there were rumors that a local housewife knew the identity of the killer. The woman's name was Rena Paquette, and although she claimed that she knew who had committed the murders, investigators never got the chance to speak with her. Early in the morning of February 3rd, 1964, Rena's 13-year-old son, Danny, walked downstairs for breakfast, but couldn't find any sign of his mother. After searching the house, Danny realized that she must have gone outside on the farm, but it was a cold winter's morning, and Rena had not taken any of her warm clothing with her. Danny went and found his uncle, and the two of them began to search the large property, calling out her name. There was no response. But around an hour into the search, Danny saw something in the distance. Smoke was rising from the family's barn, which was almost a mile away from the farmhouse. In the barn, lying in the pigsty, Danny found his mother's body. The local police arrived at the farm shortly afterwards, but after evaluating the scene, they decided that there was nothing suspicious about a woman being found burnt to death after revealing she knew the identity of a killer. The police decided that Rena must have committed suicide by setting fire to the barn herself. Danny and the rest of Rena's family never believed this story for a second, and they were convinced that whoever killed Pamela and Sandra had also killed Rena to prevent her from revealing his identity. And only a couple of weeks later, Pamela and Sandra's killer was caught. His name was Edward Coolidge, a delivery man whose .22 caliber rifle was found to be the murder weapon in both cases. For the rest of his life, Danny was haunted by Rena's death and the way that it had been brushed off by the police. He never got any closure, and that trauma began to affect all aspects of his life, in particular his mental health and his relationships with others. In 1981, his ex-wife took him to court during their divorce and filed for full custody of their children, which she was granted. Danny grew more and more angry that he wasn't able to see or speak to his children. Finally, he reached his breaking point and traveled to his ex-wife's house, ordering her to let him see the kids. She did not let him in. Instead, she called the police, and Danny was required to spend some time receiving treatment in a psychiatric hospital. One of the hospital's specialists decided to put Danny under hypnosis, hoping to reveal the cause of his anger outbursts. While he was hypnotized, Danny shared a memory from his childhood. On the very same day that his mother died, he had seen her getting into an argument with a delivery man who he believed was Edward Coolidge. After almost 6 months as a psychiatric inpatient, Danny had become much more mentally stable, and he was discharged from the hospital. He returned to his job, where he had an excellent reputation as a skilled mechanic and welder. On the 9th of November, 1985, Danny was at work with two of his friends. His friends were inside the garage working on a car, while Danny was outside doing a repair job on a bulldozer. Just past 11 a.m., both of Danny's friends were startled by a loud popping sound. Concerned that something had gone wrong with the bulldozer, they rushed outside. The bulldozer was fine, but Danny was sprawled on the ground next to it, with a single, fatal gunshot wound to his back. He had died instantly. Danny's friends naturally called the police, who arrived to secure the scene. Close to where Danny had been working, there was a trail of unidentified footprints, which appeared to show the killer approaching Danny to shoot and then fleeing the scene on foot. shortly after. Danny had been the only one shot, and the bullet had exited his body, becoming wedged in a nearby telephone pole. Wondering if the footprints at the scene could have been a red herring, investigators briefly considered that Danny might have been accidentally hit and killed by a stray bullet. They identified a gravel pit 1 mile away from the crime scene, where it was possible that a hunter could have misfired and hit Danny. But this theory was quickly discarded. There were too many obstacles between the gravel pit and Danny's body, and the bullet would have essentially had to defy the laws of physics to reach him. For basically Danny's whole life, he had been haunted by conspiracies about the mysterious death of his mother, and now his own death was being viewed in the same way. His friends and family began to wonder if Danny's killer was the same person who had staged Rena's death on the family farm. But Edward Coolidge, the family's main suspect in Rena's death, had been in prison at the time Danny died. In 1991, 6 years after Danny died, the Paquette family finally began to get some justice. The state agreed to have Rena's remains exhumed and re-examined, resulting in her official cause of death being changed from suicide to simply undetermined. However, to this day, the events that led to Rena's death and the identity of the killer have never been proven. Shortly after the body was exhumed, Edward Coolidge was released from prison. The following year, several of Danny's family members appeared on television, hoping to raise awareness about this case. Their TV appearance resulted in 2 anonymous letters being sent, which both stated the same thing. The killer was a local man by the name of Eric Windhurst. In 2004, the Danny Paquette case was reopened. Lead detective William Shackford spent weeks reading every detail in the file, and he came to one conclusion: he needed to speak to Eric Windhurst. Since the Paquettes appeared on TV, several more tips had been sent in, all suggesting that Eric may have been involved in Danny's death. One of the tips came from a girl who had even dated Eric in the past. After compiling all of the information that he had available, Detective Shackford believed that he had enough evidence to justify an arrest. And in late 2005, Eric Windhurst was charged with the murder of Danny Paquette. It turned out that in Eric Windhurst's family, his murder of Danny had been kind of an open secret. They didn't really acknowledge it, but they all knew what he had done. When Danny was killed, Eric had been only 17 years old, and he had been actually dating Danny's stepdaughter, 15-year-old Melanie. Initially, Eric had an alibi for the murder, as he and Melanie had been watching a field hockey game. But later, Melanie admitted that this was a lie. They had not been at a hockey game at all. In fact, Melanie had been there when Danny died, and she watched Eric kill him. According to Melanie, her stepfather was sexually abusive, and she finally decided that she needed to tell Eric about what was happening to her. Eric had recently been traumatized by finding out about the abuse taking place in his own family, so when he found out that his girlfriend was a victim of abuse as well, he was furious with Danny. During that conversation, he promised Melanie that he would save her from abuse by killing her stepfather. It was late 2006 when Eric was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison for second-degree murder. Even though Melanie had been only 15 years old at the time her stepfather was killed, she was charged with hindering an investigation and received a 3-year prison sentence. In October 2020, after 14 years in prison, Eric Windhurst's application for parole was approved, and 2 months later, he was released. Danny's killer may have been brought to justice, but nobody will ever know for sure who shot Rena Paquette in the family barn and lit her on fire. There was only one person who had something to gain from Rena's silence: the murderer, whose name she threatened to reveal to the police. And if that name was Edward Coolidge, Rena Paquette's killer walked free. That is 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe. That's my name. Hi. I really appreciate you listening today. And if you are brand new to listening to 10-Minute Murder, settle in, make yourself comfortable. Use a coaster, please. And make sure you subscribe now so that you can more easily catch up on all the back episodes and find the podcast more easily when you want to listen to it. Connect with me on social media to see the pictures of what we talk about here in the podcast. It's never gross and graphic crime scene kind of things, though. I don't want to see that, and I assume that you don't either. If you do want to see that, you can, ask Jeeves yourself. Is that even a thing anymore? Someone tell me if that's a thing. I don't want to look it up. Anyway, if you like this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, Audible, any place that's possible to leave a rating and review. Your positive feedback is very much appreciated. And quickly, an update on the podcast, what I'm going to be doing next month. I'm going to be telling stories about true crime, stories about murder. Like always, right? But then I'm also going to be giving away gift cards, probably Target gift cards. And why am I telling you now? It's September. I'm saying these words right now in September. You might not be listening to it in September, but it's September for me right in this moment. It's just in case you're listening to it later, it's September now. But in October, I'm going to be giving away gift cards, like I said, probably to Target, for you to share this podcast. I know that so many of you already do that, and that's why the podcast grows so much, because of all of you that share this podcast with your friends and family. However, I'd like to do something to reward you that share this podcast so much. So in the month of October, I'm going to be giving away gift cards to those of you that are sharing the podcast. And to enter that, all you have to do is share the podcast. I'll find you. If you want to be doubly sure, you can tag me or send me a screenshot of you sharing it, whatever you think is necessary. But I'm going to be choosing some people at random and give you gift cards to Target. Why Target? Because I love Target. So more details on that are coming up, but just know that I'm giving gift cards to people that are sharing this podcast. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to 10 Minute Murder.